Right, hello. I think we're ready. Firstly, thank you so much for coming. This is really exciting to see a room full of people. It's the end of the day, so maybe you had a coffee. Maybe you use one of our machines to make the coffee. Probably not, because it's all Nespresso here. I just want to start by saying I'm super excited to the point of nervousness, so just give me a moment to really enjoy and be glad that I'm here. I'm going to talk to you today about transforming data at a 110-year-old manufacturing company. What does that look like? Who am I? What's the scene? And then hopefully we'll have loads of time for questions as well. So, how did I get here? Let me tell you why you should listen to me about data. So 6 years ago, I started at a digital marketing company. I didn't really know what being a data analyst was. I just finished my maths degree and I just went for it because the skills was very highly overlapping with what I felt I had. I worked there for 2 years, and kind of within the 2 years, I really fell in love with data in a really sickening, horrible, romantic, cheesy rom-com kind of way. And within 2 years, they made me a data scientist. But I tell you what, if you make someone a data scientist or give them that job title, it doesn't actually make them a data scientist. It takes time to build those skills. It takes time to really understand that space to get your data clean. But this isn't a talk about data science. It's talk about data transformation. So what I soon very quickly realized was that I needed to be in a different space where I could learn from other people who are really, really enthusiastic and knowledgeable about data. So this is when I moved to a data consultancy. There's a few folks in the back from the data consultancy, which is super nice. And I started working there as a data engineer. This is when I realized that being a data analyst actually, for me, overlapped with being an engineer. And then I moved into the space where I could learn and kind of teach other analysts and engineers to get them further ahead in their career. At about the 5-year mark, I became a data consultant. This was super exciting because after being really hands-on with the data and really looking at, okay, how do we build solutions and systems and make sure that the end users actually have the data they need, I could then sell these things. I could tell people why they should care so much about their data, why should they invest in this, and really be able to speak to some senior stakeholders about all of this. So at the end of 2021, so just last year, for a few personal reasons, I just needed to leave. I needed to take a break for myself and also just to reprioritize. So to keep things consistent, during this time I was a baker, so I was baking things. Some things were good, some things weren't. It was December, but I still insisted on being out in the garden. And also I made sure to keep in touch with the data community and continue to mentor. So why have I put this here? It's not really about data, but it's about my mental health and my personal experiences. And I really want to make sure that everyone in this room knows that it's okay to talk about that. And it's a very important side step for me to take to talk to you about that. So back to the data. If I take a deep breath in, I can say this in one go. I'm currently working at Whirlpool Corporation as a Global Digital Analytics Manager. It's a big title, but what does it really mean? I work with the people and the teams within Whirlpool to focus on what data they're collecting. Are they collecting it in the right way? Have they stored it in the right way? Are they using it in the right way to actually drive data decisions as well? So this is kind of the setting. I think I'm about 4 minutes in already. I will get to the actual talk, but hopefully you understand a little bit more about me now. So here's the agenda. We're going to understand what the direct-to-consumer initiative looks like at Whirlpool. I'll explain a little bit about this. I'll talk to you about the example that we'll talk through today and give you an overview of that engagement. Talk to you about the critical steps. So this is the bit, whether you work in data, whether you work in a different organization, no matter who you are, I hope that this will help and support you and you can take these steps away. I'll talk about the challenges because, of course, everything's never easy and just straightforward. And then the outcomes, of course. So let's talk about washing machines. I suppose if you think about Whirlpool, maybe you think about washing machines, dishwashers, but actually Whirlpool is a lot more than just this one brand and logo. We have multiple different brands selling loads of different products. So from water filters to laundry care, all the way over to stand mixers and KitchenAid and washing machines, of course, as well. So the company is 110 years old, but the D2C initiative, which is direct to consumer, where we're really focusing on the web commerce and the e-commerce platforms, is only about 3 to 4 years old. So a lot of people tend to move through their careers in Whirlpool. Of course, with it being a big corporate, you'll see this sometimes, that people will spend 30 years at one company. So how do we get these people who have been working in data or just in manufacturing in a way that isn't very digital and e-commerce focused? We have a digital centre of excellence. So this works for us because we have a team of global experts, not only because they are literally based all around the globe, but also because they've got such a diverse range of different talents. And we have a team that's really focused in their areas of specialism. So if we're putting a website on the internet and we want people to find it, we need to make sure our SEO is good. Let's make sure people go to Google and can actually find us and our products. In terms of when they've actually arrived at the website then, let's make sure that there's been some experimentation and we've done some testing to say, right, these website components are absolutely fantastic, and we're going to get to a place where our customers will find what they want and hopefully make that purchase. Privacy and security, of course, is very important too, as is analytics, and we're all at a data conference, so I hope you'll agree with me in that. But our focus really is about accelerating that e-commerce D2C learning curve. So one of the main things that we have as a team is to think globally. So think about the big strategies, but also make sure that when you're having a one-on-one conversation with one of the teams, that you're really thinking about the challenges that they have. What is the challenge that someone in Brazil is going to face because of the, economic climate there versus what's happening, over here in Europe at the moment as well? So we have markets that have got their D2C kind of offering. It's been around for maybe 2 to 3 years, and we've also got those that are 2 to 3 months. So we really have different people at the different stage of the maturity curve. So we need to be able to support each of these people and business units. So what does the DCoE really look like? We don't have a chief digital officer. I'm sure that works in many cases, but for us, working at such a big corporation, we want to be able to say, okay, here's the specialist that's going to come and be able to sit next to you and talk to you and really understand the problems that you have. This means as well that we can kind of work in this hybrid model where we've got the strategic decisions coming in from the DCoE, but also the people, the managers within the team, really focused on helping the day-to-day running of things within markets. So this decentralized model really allows us, like I say, to focus on providing support in a region. So this is where you get to see some very happy selfies of me. I started at Whirlpool in March, so it's not been very long, but within mid-April, so what's that, 6 weeks, there was an opportunity for me to go and work with the Canadian team. So I was then on a short assignment, which was involving me being the digital analytics manager. Not only was I learning about Whirlpool still, I was learning about how the Canadian markets work. I was getting to know a new team that I was suddenly managing very quickly. I made sure to make time to go and do the touristy things as well. And if you're wondering about the geese, apparently there's some viral geese online that I don't really know about, but this happened right next to the office. So if you search viral geese, maybe you'll find it, I don't know. But let me give you a bit more information about the Canadian engagement. So there was a situation where very suddenly there was the digital analytics manager was no longer at the company. So this had provided the perfect opportunity for me to jump into that market and grow their maturity and capability and help understand some of the challenges. So this was focused in 3 ways. One was around tactical hands-on support, so really sitting with the analyst. And I'll note that this was virtually. Over the 3 or 4 months that I engaged in this project, I maybe spent about 2.5 weeks actually in the office in Toronto. But what I was focused on was saying, okay, here's hands-on support. Here's how you kind of do the best practices with building a dashboard that really helps your customers. Here's how we build, data engineering pipelines so that we can actually get the data out in a good, clean, and efficient manner. The next thing was focusing about the strategic capability, so thinking about, right, in the future, we need to sort these fundamental things out now, but how do we get to a place where we can start doing some of the more exciting things and start being proactive rather than reactive? And the last thing, as I said already, this was about a 3 or 4 month engagement, so I needed to focus on recruiting the next person, the right person who was going to carry on making the team excel, and also to understand, well, is this team actually kind of organised in the right way? So there was a 3-stage approach. One was about watching and learning. I didn't want to go in and just completely disrupt and tell them, like, this is my way, we're going to do it this way. Not only do I not have the confidence for that, it's just not the right thing to do. But I wanted to watch and learn and really understand, right, well, how are they doing things now? Why have they arrived at this? Some of these things are often legacy-based, where it's just always been that way, so we're not going to change it. But I'm not going to change something just because it's always been that way, but also let's think about why are we really doing that. So then that brings me into the second phase, where I can say, okay, let's just try tweaking that thing just a little bit. Let's just move from, rather than doing a monthly session where we've got all of these stakeholders coming and sitting and listening to you read a report, why don't we send it out before, and people can come to the meeting just if they have any questions. And if there weren't processes around, so for example, in submitting a new request to the data team, then to introduce these things, just taking a bit of a stock as to what are the things that are happening now. It might be 5 different ways. You know, we had emails, Google Chats, maybe Carrier Pigeon was used at some point, I don't know, but there's all these different ways in which we were communicating, which made things really slow. And the last bit was about feedback. So I'm not suggesting that within phase 1 and 2 I had and took no feedback, but I really wanted to make sure I was sending out surveys, sitting and with some of the leadership team and saying, how does this feel? You know, we've made some changes. Have you noticed any differences? What are still some pain points? And then taking that and putting it into a strategy report. So then saying to people, right, well, for the new analytics manager as well, to say, look, here's some of the problems that I've seen, here's some of the solutions, but not just leaving it as a, you could try this, you could try this, leaving it as a, try this first because this is a quick win, and then try this thing over here maybe in 3 or 4 months once you've got a bit more buy-in from your leadership team. And for example, we needed an analytics platform. So of course there's so many of them out here, but what I took the time to do was to take and do some research so that I could say, you know, here's 3 options, here's the pros and cons of each, here's the cost of each. Because otherwise it's all well and good saying all these tools are super shiny, but I hope when you've been speaking to all these vendors today, you've been asking them about price, because that's probably the last thing they'll tell you about. But what I really wanted to do here was make sure that everyone that I was speaking to around the e-commerce space had a real understanding of what was happening with their data. Data is a really core building block around making sure that we can measure what's actually happening and measuring the success. It's literally everywhere is data, and that's part of the reason why I love it. It's got such a big power and influence. But what I wanted to do is make sure that I knew who were the people that were engaging with different components of data so that I could speak to them and have, you know, if you've met Carruthers and Jackson, have a coffee and cake with them. Go, which is a bit more difficult virtually, but still possible, so that we could kind of build on these things and really influence decision making. Another core component of what I worked on was not just doing an analysis of the tooling landscape, but understanding what people do we have. What documentation do we have? Often it's none. It wasn't very, very much, but it was enough to work with. What meetings have we got in place? What do we do when some incident happens? That's a really good way to test, okay, what processes do we have and do they actually work? So this was really important, and I suppose this is one of the key takeaways, is when you're looking at making some sort of change, don't just think about the tools, that's one component of it, but there's 3 key parts, is people, process, and tools. So this is how I structured my strategy report, looking at people. Who are the core people that identify and kind of work with the data? This doesn't just mean the data teams, this means your stakeholders, it means the leadership teams. It also means the agencies that are doing your development work. In terms of the data and the teams, how do people actually interact with it? What are the core challenges? Are people trusting their data well enough to actually use it to make actionable insights? And make sure that you've kind of understood the fundamentals around, right, okay, for D2C and e-commerce, conversion, sessions, purchases, these are all absolute fundamental metrics. We need to make sure that we can see these at all times. and future-proof this. People are really excited about data if you help them to realize it's not too scary and that actually we can do the things that they want to do. So understand what are people's ambitions around data, what are the things that they're missing right now, and that can be your line in the sand in the future. So for me, process is, if you don't have process but you've got people and tools, they might as well not exist because you've got no real way and solid platform on how to utilize these two things. So documentation is highly boring. I will admit that myself, but how long does it take to just write a process down so that if someone takes a sick day, we're not wondering, well, how do we actually get this data that we need? So build together things like stakeholder maps, build together things like lines of communication so that you know if someone is missing from a team or whatever has happened, then we can still understand who do we need to speak to, who do we make sure that we absolutely let know that something's changed and that they need to be aware of this. One of the things that I'm super excited about building, which is so simple, is an FAQ doc. We get constantly asked the same question over and over again. If I can push a doc in front of someone and say, your answer's probably on here, please find it here, and if you can't find the answer, then yes, speak to me. That means that when people say, okay, well, I don't have enough time because I'm constantly being asked this question by that person, and etc., actually an FAQs document just to say, yeah, just go and find your answer here because I'm getting this question answered so many times. And that's the same with how-to guides, like how do I submit a request to the data team? I don't want to explain that to someone every single time, that's a waste of my time. So if I can write that down, that's going to be super important. That kind of leads into repeatability. So having clear instructions for request types, not just for the stakeholders who are asking for data, but also for the team who are going to fulfill that request. Making sure that you have feedback loops as well is really important, because if you get into something that's repeatable and 10 months down the line, you need to actually check, is this still relevant or not? Or should I can this process because it's just, it's expensive for me to run. It might even just be cheap, but it's just still a waste of time. And the last thing on this process map is kind of thinking about suitability. So we can pump out loads and loads of data. I'm sure you've all seen it, but if it's not the right data, what's the point? We want to make sure that we have the power to give people data that actually allows them to make actionable insights. We need to understand what's the right time to insight. For us, Black Friday is about to come up, so that will be a big sales period. We need to make sure we have data that is as close to real time as we can. Seeing the data next year is probably going to be less useful for us. Which also then means that we can have a short time to action, and we're constantly going to be iterating over this. It's not something that we're going to try and build the golden solution now. Let's just build something that we can use and then kind of add to that. So I'm not going to ignore tools. Like I say, they are really important. Again, you can go and find loads of them out here. But one of the biggest things is understanding what tools you already have. So within the Canadian market, it's a solid size market, but I'm currently working with the European team where it's much, much bigger. So there is so many more tools. So to audit the existing tools that you have is really important. Maybe you've got 3 tools that are doing like 40–50% of the work that you need them to do, but why don't you consolidate that down to 2 where you've got between them, they're kind of filling 80% of your requirements. Not only have you saved money, not only have you saved time from jumping from system to system, but also you're just making it easier for your end users to actually get to that data. Okay, yeah, and then thinking about automation. Automation, I'm sure if you've been out there to other talks, there's lots of talks about automation. It doesn't make sense to be using manual processes. Not only are they prone to human error, they're a waste of time, it's boring. It's very important to build processes in a manual way to begin with, but moving towards automation saves time and increases efficiency. So data governance, you're not at the wrong stage. There's a whole data governance stage, but what I want to talk to you is about how you should really understand what data you have. If you don't know what you have, then your security and privacy are at risk. And not only that, are you underutilizing the assets that you have. Data is a really big, valuable asset, so we should be using that to its full potential. And making sure that data is actually available is really important, so then we can say, okay, when do we need to refresh these systems? Let's make sure that we can have self-serve dashboards if that's the right thing to do versus doing bespoke analysis every single time. So on to the second half of the talk. This bit will be a bit quicker to make sure that we've got time for questions, but here's those critical steps that if you're doing some sort of transformation, try to think about these things. So build trust and understanding. As I said in phase 1, I didn't want to go in and just bulldoze and say, look, here's all the changes. I needed to build trust with stakeholders, with the data team, and really understanding, okay, we've got this person sat in this brand team here. Do they look at the same data the same way that the leadership team does? Because if they don't, when they have a conversation, it's going to be much slower and much more difficult to kind of get to an actionable stage. Can we reproduce data in the same way? Again, otherwise we have efficiencies. So inefficiencies, rather, that's a key word, inefficiencies. So if we are not able to reproduce data in the same way, then we have a lack of trust and understanding from our stakeholders. We've talked about processes a lot. Here's some more about processes. Looking at what they look like now, or whether there's actually a big absence of them, is really important. But putting that kind of future ambitious and having these audacious goals is really important so that we can say, okay, where do we want to get to in the future? We're at a networking event, but I really want to talk about networking and collaboration. For us at Whirlpool, we've got a global team, so there's a real opportunity for us to align people from the Canadian team. Currently, I'm working with the European team to say, okay, I know that this problem has already been solved in another space. It wasn't the exact same, but it's close enough that you can take some learnings there, and they can actually learn from you too. And having a community where you can actually go and get some support also is super, super important. So common challenges, I've talked about these a few times, but we don't have enough time. We don't have the resources. We want the answers now, and we don't have the right people. What we need to remember is that if time is being wasted somewhere, that's an opportunity to bring some of that time back and then say, okay, where can we spend this instead? That will free up resource and really help you to kind of get to these actionable states. And actually, one of the best examples I have, we went from having a 2-week manual process to build some data reports every single month. So that's 50% of someone's time to then say, right, okay, what's happening here? So they were taking data from our web analytics tool, putting it in spreadsheets, putting it in slides. So I said, let's make the web analytics tool do its job, build the report here, we can take screenshots. That saved a week and a half. It's so simple, but that then allows people to go from having data for the last month within the 3rd week of the next month to having it on the 1st of the current month for the previous month. And saying that we don't have the right people, if you have conversations with your people, you'll really understand them. So again, I thought I had a team of just web analysts, but when I spoke to them, they had SQL experience, Python experience, all of these things that were really useful to me. So second to last slide, the engagement output. So I saved a lot of time. Like I've just said there, we had 2 weeks down to 3 days. All these different really were quick wins, really allowed the opportunity to then redirect this time. So rather than doing these manual reports, we're now building a suite of self-serve dashboards. I say we, it's not actually me, so there's a new analytics manager in town, and they are carrying forward all the work that I've done and continuing to be ambitious and kind of building a great analytics community. We had a data engineer sat over here, 2 dashboard developers here, and then a team of digital analysts. Bringing those 3 people, or 3 groups all together has been really fantastic, and then saying, okay, we've got a solid unit that all stakeholders can come to us. We can share ideas. I'm not expecting my web analyst to become a data engineer, but they can support each other in what they're building. And the last thing, I created a very, very actionable data strategy report. I identified the challenges that there were, and then also said, okay, here's how you solve these things. You know, here's some options of how to solve this. It's not a, you know, you must do this. It's not a to-do list. It's a foundation so that the new leader, data leader, can kind of build on the community. So this was very much focused about Whirlpool, this was very much focused about global, but it was also focused about transformation. So I hope that you've taken something from today which will help you in your next change management process, because it wasn't really a talk about data, it was a talk about change management. So thank you.